with Ken's urging, we're reinserting in our programs some tech counselor talks. Over the last 30 or so years I've been in this area, in this chapter, it's waned from who are they to, damn, we can't get them to shut up. Get a hook, pull them off. So we're going to try to operate somewhere in between there. William, Bryant, and myself. I've got a whole stack of old presentations, old in the sense that I've given them once, and I'll purse through those and find some worth updating. And so I was just going to introduce the next thing I'm going to do a little bit later is that I've been painting my 12. Anybody at the airport knows. My taxiway is slightly colored.
Jason hangers.
No, I didn't get any on any airplane. Some of you guys that are on the airport may have driven by. So that presentation will cover design, tools, processes, and all hex, all shits. The goof ups, which is constant if you're not in the business, because every step is really not terribly hard, but it's like riveting. One little oops, you got to repair, and repair is a big deal. So just as a teaser, I brought a couple parts. The better parts are too big to haul in here, but I use, with some help from Bobby Rips, some paint from the local Advanced Auto Shop, auto parts store. They carry the stuff from Europe. The commercial mid-grade works quite well, and it's relatively expensive, and I'll only touch on that. The going rate for an average job is what, 15 grand or more, Brian?
Average?
No, not your kind of thing.
Okay, so let's see. Evoke Aviation's quoting $32,000 for an RV-14. If you've seen Evoke paint jobs, they're like eight coats of paint, right? 9 coats of primer. I mean, it's just crazy how they do stuff.
So not only do you have to put aside money for avionics, which is what Brian and I also do. Yeah, you gotta raid somebody's fund. I don't know who it is. And so just right now I'm in about $1,200, $1,300, maybe $1,400, because the shop screwed me up and gave me one component wrong, which can happen. So it's just fraught with opportunities to fail, fraught with potholes to slow you down, and want to throw things. Of course, I never hit my wife. I never say anything bad to my wife, but you get close. So anyway, here's the stabilator tip. This and a light blue, Bahama blue, are the colors my airplanes have been since 78 and 9s when I painted my first BD4. So you can achieve that kind of stuff, but this is a very easy part to paint. It was already pretty smooth, and I didn't have to do any fancy stuff. So both of these are fairly easy. It gets more complicated because you put stripes. Those require taping, which is really an art that has to be developed. And then a lot of papering and throwing away paper and getting more paper. And I'll talk about all that. This is the tail cone in white. So these parts that are already molded, that don't have any cracks and rivets and edges and all, you really can do this very well out of the box. Practice a little bit and do it. So these guys have much more interesting stuff to talk about than we might do this. So with that, any questions? Yeah.
Safety?
There was a known guy painting who didn't wear his respirator when he was mixing some epoxy paint, and the local guys had to help him around because he was doing this. Now, I wouldn't want to identify that fellow, but no, there's some of the chemicals, if not possibly all of them, you cannot tolerate any clothes without respirators. And if it's really closed, you have to have fresh air respiration. So you have to plan on protecting yourself. It's not hard. And if you have to paint outside, which is what you have to do if you don't have a paint booth, and build one like Gary did, I'll probably have him comment about doing that. And you really got to watch it. Some of the paints, let's see, ask your question. Some of the paints like I'm doing are not, they're not Toxic. Well, they're all toxic, but the two-part paints that are really epoxies, basically, Imron, some of the jet paints, those are killers. You have no choice. They will kill you because it's got isocyanide in, and that stuff goes in and never comes out. And at a certain level, your body doesn't like it at all, hardly at all. The average stuff, if you just stay down upwind, upwind when you spray, and you got a good fresh respirator, fresh cartridges, respirator, that's the thing you put on here. And you ought to wear glasses and gloves. And I'll go through all that, so let's don't get started. So, any other questions?
Yeah, and throw in the weather.
Well, yeah, there's weather, temperature, wind, bugs, time of day, lookers on, helpers.
Pollen.
What? Pollen, yeah.
This time of year you get rain.
Yeah, you got to watch. Yeah, you got to watch what you do. It's surprising that I've got several, not in this one, almost, well, there's one. There's where a little flea landed or some kind of little bug. And what is the secret? Don't fool with it until it dries. Like now, if you rub it off and maybe polish a little bit, you'll never know it, especially if you can't even see it from here. So just decide when you start, are you going to have one of these jobs, or are you going to have, that looks pretty good. That kind of thing. Is that 50 foot? It looks pretty, well, I shoot for like 5 or something where guys come by and say, that looks pretty good. And if you see them walk up, you say, hey, let's go look over here. Anyway, enough jokes. Thanks. Let me leave these here.
Is that stabilator clear coated?
It's what?
Is it clear coated?
No. The paints, the modern single stage paints, by the way, single stage means you paint it as the final coat and you don't put any clear on it. Two stage is the way all cars and things that are real shiny, look pretty, are done. That separates the paint process in two things. One is getting the color right. That's the first stage, which this would be. And the second one is putting a clear, shiny, fairly thick coat on that you can buff and clean up, making it shine. That's two stage. So this has been going on for a while. By the way, see that? Can you see that tone difference there and there? That means when I was shooting like this, I kind of got, okay, I should have run one right there. So there's all kinds of stuff like that you'll learn quickly. They actually build into the paint a certain amount of clear coat. And I don't know how they do it. But one of the paint guys is explaining this to me. They design it so as it starts flashing off and drying, some of the clear will come to the surface and you effectively get clear coat, but it's a continuous medium. But you can buff that a little bit, but you go very far, you'll see it.
What was the brand you used?
It's, I'll have to give it to you. It's Sikkens. It's the Sikkens parent company that's in Europe. Nobel's part of the name. Asco Nobel. And it's relatively good stuff. It's also here, it's pre-mixed with the diluter part. You know, there's base color, then there's diluter. Some paints use, like you get a quart and it makes a quart and a half of paint. Then you have an activator that's a hardener, or else it's half again, which is epoxy. That's the two kinds of paint. And then you may have to put a small amount of thinner, you and I would call it. It's reducer depending on kind of paint. And that will actually add to the flash and add to the thinness. So you play with that. But the best thing to do is, whatever the can says, do that and live with it. Because it's really exotic to play with. The guys that paint all the time play with everything.
So when you use the term flash off, can you explain that?
Yeah. When you shoot the paint, you can't touch it, nothing get on it for 15, 20 minutes. And that's the initial volatiles coming out of the paint. And you actually do all the paints in two passes. The first pass gets light color to medium color on, let it alone for 15 minutes, whatever the can says, usually 15 minutes. That gets volatiles out, but it's still tacky and messy. And then you shoot the cross coat. You always run this way and then the next one this way, because that way covers striping effect that can occur. You almost get it right here. You see, I don't know if you can. There's a striping effect that comes on how you do these colors, because they're not pure color, they're kind of translucent. So the second coat goes on, you put that on medium, which is a little slower. Here's the first coat. And you want to get that kind of action. See how exaggerated, stopping, moving, coming back on before you get to the medium. That's all robots do at the factory. That's why it's so good. That second medium and heavier coat, depending on where you're at, will tend not to run or sag. See, because it'll be pulling the solvent. The first coat will be pulling some of the solvent out of the second coat. And quite often, if done a little practice, it'll end up, it won't run. If you shoot, say, oh, it's not dark enough to shoot again, you set it down, there'll be a sag right there. Or if you put it here, it'll run, and there's no recovery. Let her dry and sand it down. If you try to wipe that, you might as well wipe the whole thing. And there's a gallon of lacquer thinner, a lot of stuff, 2 rolls of paper towels, and all your hanger buddies come by and say, what are you doing? That's enough. Thanks.
Thanks, Dean.
I was going to talk about aircraft hardware and stuff. In this book, everybody who's building should have one because it gives you all the standardizations of anything you're looking for. If you want to know how to do safety wire, what size Carter keys go where, how to put them in properly. So this Air Advisory Circular book is what you need for that. And so what I was going to talk about was what was in this magazine that we just got. How many read the article on installing nut plates in this magazine in the back? A couple of you? All right. Well, it was a good article, but it left out some really critical things, I think. And the first thing I want to talk about is that all nut plates are not manufactured correctly. Because you can put a nut plate in and turn around, the next thing you know, you can't get a screw in it. So here's a trick. I've got this. It's a little knob from Home Depot, 8/32. You just take it up to your little nut plate, and you get to screw it right in to make sure the threads are in there. That's the big tip, because I've put a lot of these in, and all of a sudden the screws won't screw in. And you could try several different screws, and that's what it is. So tip number 1 is get you one of these, and that way you have an easy way to test a nut plate to make sure they're right. And there's so many different nut plates. Here's a nut plate that is totally sealed. You could use this in your gas tank if you wanted to. If you're building an RV, to keep those screws from leaking. But you'd also have to come back in and put Pro Seal on the inside of it anyway to seal that up. But there's a lot of different nut plates. The tools. This is a number 8 nut plate drill tool. You drill your primary nut hole. You put this pin in, and then you drill one of the holes. Then you flip it over, and the pin goes in that hole, and then the screw hole. Then you drill your other hole to do alignments. They make them in all different sizes. I have number 4s, number 6, and number 8s on my RV7 that I've built. Number 4s were the wing tips. Number 6s were somewhere else in the aircraft, and then mainly number 8s. They make what they call a countersink nut plate. This is one. I can pass them around, but it's set up for a number 8 countersink screw. But these are set up to be mounted flush, while a lot of times you need to dimple. And they do make them where these legs up here are dimpled already for you, so when you put a nut, it sits flush in there when you dimple it. Now, the problem we have with dimpling, is what I'm going to put up here real quick. See if I can get to the picture. Alright. These two holes were originally drilled with a number 40 drill bit. And that's what all these nut plates use, a number 40. I'll pass this around and you can look at that. That's what this piece is. This is a standard AN3 426 AD 3-3 rivet that we use all over in RVs. This rivet is an NSA 1097 AD reduced head rivet, otherwise what we call an oops rivet. But this is for, the head is for a number 2 rivet, while the body is still a number 3 rivet. So when you drill these holes in this thin aluminum, that's how much countersinking you have to do to get this rivet to fit properly. Look how big that hole is now. If you use these small oops rivet like that, and I use lots of these, you just barely deburr it with your deburring tool, and the rivet fits perfectly in there, and it's flush. These rivets are hard to find. They're called oops rivets. And the ones I generally used on the RV were for these standard AN 426 3s. Because what happens is if you drill one out, you end up widening. And so you buy an oops rivet that's a -4, and you put that in because it has the same head size as a -3, so you can't tell that you've messed up anywhere on the airplane. You've had to drill out a rivet. So that's one of the things. You can buy these rivets from Aircraft Spruce, but they come in a pack of what they call oops rivets. They don't sell just the rivet. Now you can find the rivets if you know the NSA number, which is 1097 AD 3-3. You can find them, but they sell a box of what they call oops rivets, and it has 3-3s, 3-3.5s, and 3-4s, and then they have, I think, 4-3, 4-4, and a 4-5 in a box of oops rivets. But these are what you really need to put in these nut plates. They really make a big difference of how much, especially if you're doing any type of thin metal. That's like 0/16th, I think that piece of aluminum was. I'm just showing an example there of what to do there. And that, the article is pretty good. Other than that, it left out a lot of things like this and tips. But so that's all I had for the oops, the rivets. There are all kinds of little tools you can make. In the article, it shows a guy using a nut and a bolt. So he puts the rivet up, the nut plate on, he sticks it up and screws in the bolt, and he tightens the nut to hold it into place. That's one way to do it. The other way is you can use a cleco. All my clecos are out at the airport, so I didn't bring any of those in. You can put the nut plate on, use a cleco the right size. It will hold it into position. You drill one hole, put a cleco in that hole, and then you drill the other hole so they all stay lined up. So there's another way to do that. So any questions on?
As opposed to using those special rivets, instead of trying to machine countersink, when they just dimple the hole.
Well, yeah, you can if you have but if you dimple the hole and you don't use a nut plate that has a dimple in it, it's going to push that nut plate off the skin. So you can do it like that, absolutely, but you're going to be aware of that. But if all I have to do is do one slight turn with a countersink, because I got to deburr the hole anyway, I'm already there. I don't need to go any further, and then it's all smooth and tight.
You can dimple a nut plate too.
Yeah, you can. Those steels are hard to dimple, but you can buy them already dimpled, but they're a lot more money. They won't. Yeah.
Bennett still didn't do that.
They didn't say anything on mine, but on my 7.
But all the problem I ever had was when that place likes to bend the wings and you have to go make sure, okay, get them back out.
Right.
They move.
Sure, when you dimple them, absolutely. So that just keeps it something else you don't have to do if you do that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was I was at a guy's hangar the other day helping him, and he was torquing something and he dropped his torque wrench. And I went, and he just picked it up and went right back to torquing. And I went, oh. Anytime you drop a torque wrench, you need to send it to a calibration shop to have it calibrated. I don't know how many know that. I used to have to run the tool shop in the Army, in the aviation maintenance unit I was in, and I was constantly sending torque wrenches off that the mechanics dropped to be recalibrated all the time. Because, especially if you're working on the engine, taking off and putting on some of the center bolts because you're attaching your baffling to it or something, then you should know the right torque to put that bolt back together with, and use a good torque wrench. So that's all I really have. So
Thank you, Will.
that's
great.
And there we go. Okay. All right. Good morning. Wow, it's packed. My name is Brian Decker. I'm one of the tech counselors for this chapter, kind of just new to the role. I've been building RVs since about 1998, and thought I'd share with you today some recent findings on a project we've been working on. This is carbon monoxide. So how many, by a show of hands, have carbon monoxide detectors in their airplanes? Okay, good. So this won't be totally foreign, and you guys can correct me when I stray. So carbon monoxide, just as a high school chemistry reminder, is the incomplete byproduct of combustion of carbon-based fuels. It is poisonous, and it is odorless, colorless, and it's also flammable in the right concentrations in the presence of oxygen. It's bad. Well, it's bad because it binds to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, and it prevents oxygen, the oxygen doublet that's always in the air we breathe, from actually binding to the hemoglobin. So carbon monoxide gets in your lungs, it gets into your tissues, and the oxygen can't get in. And it doesn't just dissipate very easily. It stays bound to that hemoglobin for a long time. And the effect is worse in an airplane cabin at lower pressures and in Denver. Again, it's produced in our engines. It comes from the burning of fossil or carbon-based fuels. Typically, it goes from the combustion chamber cylinders out the exhaust pipe into the slipstream, and you don't notice it, except when it doesn't. And included for picture here is a couple of exhaust stacks. The picture's not great. I apologize for that, but this is from a Mooney with a cracked exhaust header and also a cracked exhaust heater core. So the exhaust is not going out the pipe, it's going everywhere it shouldn't. There are a number of ways to detect it in your aircraft. We're all familiar with this. If you have these, I recommend you throw them out. They're no good. They are life limited, and they don't tell you how many parts per million carbon monoxide you have in your cabin. So it turns black. Well, what good is that? Do I have 1 part per million, or do I have 900 parts per million? You have no way of knowing, so it's not really a good tool to look at data with. The personal portable ones, I like these. If you're renting, moving from airplane to airplane, whatever, you can use them anywhere. They're very accurate. I think probably the downside is they've got a battery that you've got to keep fresh. Make sure you use the right batteries. And they're also set up to alarm and alert and blink and make all kinds of noise. But in a cockpit, you might not see it. They're not in front of you. You kind of have to deal with it. The best kind that I personally like are these hardwired ones. CO Guardian and Aether have hardwired detectors. They're powered by the ship or the main bus, and they alert out via your ethos or LED you've got on your dash or wherever. They're very accurate, reliable, and you can see what's going on. And if you have them wired into your ethos, you can actually see how many parts per million of carbon monoxide you have in your cabin. So I actually have this one, the Aether 2.0. Aether's got another version, the 3.0, which allows for remote monitoring of your oxygen tank and your pulse oximeter. So if you fly with a pulse oximeter, it can read that and display that in your ethos too. So you've got kind of a holistic view of all your blood gases and cabin environment as you're flying. Okay. I didn't. What the price is? So the cardboard ones you can throw away, I think, are like $20 for a 10-pack. I mean, they're very cheap. Portable ones are about $99. You can find them on Amazon for as low as $30. And the integrated ones are more expensive. I think I paid about $200 for my Aether. And the CO Guardian, I don't have a price, but I suspect it's in that same ballpark. So less than a whole AMU, maybe 0.2 of an AMU, aviation monetary unit. But worth it, worth every penny. So a couple years ago, the NTSB came out with a recommendation to the FAA to basically update the regs about required equipment. There have been 31 accidents that the NTSB has tracked from 1982 to 2020, with 23 fatalities attributed to carbon monoxide. The FAA has not taken any action on that. But it kind of hit Flying Magazine and whatever, and it was kind of a, aha, for a number of years. So kind of my history. I've been flying since 1991. And I've never had a carbon monoxide detector in any of my aircraft until 2021. I'm very lucky. I'm also slightly brain damaged because I'm a pilot. Anyway, carbon monoxide levels above 9 parts per million for 8 hours or below 25 parts per million for less than 2 hours is considered hazardous. Carbon monoxide does accumulate in the bloodstream. So it's an exposure thing. If you've got a long cross-country flight and you're running a few parts per million, it's building up in your bloodstream. So at the end of the flight, you might not feel so good, or you might be incapacitated. It kind of varies. Okay, so that's kind of the background to carbon monoxide. I've been a tech counselor now for a few months, and I'm helping a friend with his RV-14A. I also helped build this airplane, and he bought it from the guy, and it traded hands. And he had his first flight, and he noticed right off the bat that his EFIS started alarming that he had high levels of carbon monoxide in the cabin. Like first flight, it went to 75 parts per million, so he knocked it off in short order and landed and looked at it. And I'm sorry, this airplane, RV-14A, it was, if you've been working with Van's stuff, you'll notice that the RV-14, the RV-10, the RV-12 have a much different construction methodology than the older RVs. Van's is very prescriptive about what to do, how to do it when you're building these things. So they've kind of moved from being an RV-4, RV-6, 7, where you kind of had here's your basket of parts, there's the plans, go, right? The RV-14 is very, this sequence, this part, this rivet, pause, this chapter, they go through everything. So this plane was built per plans, per the steps, with a slight deviation that I'll mention. The DAR was Vic Syracuse. You all know Vic, pretty famous guy. He's inspected thousands of RVs. Not much gets by him. Anyway, so he signed off on this thing, and then the first flight, carbon monoxide went through the roof. So we started looking at it. The owner was like, hey, I'm going to figure this out myself. So the owner hooked a vacuum cleaner up, the exhaust port of the vacuum cleaner to the exhaust stack, turned it on, sprayed soapy bubbles on the exhaust stack, and lo and behold, bubbles. Except it's a red herring because it's a slip fitting. And all of our airplanes have exhaust fittings that slide together. These slip fittings are designed for two things. They seal up when they get hot, and this was done when it was cold, obviously. So they provide some movement, which also provides a leak path for the combustion gases. So right at the start, before they get hot, they're leaking carbon monoxide. In flight, they're not so much because those pipes are cherry red. They've expanded, they've sealed tight. So this was interesting, but it wasn't the root cause of what was going on with this airplane. And you can see you hear the vacuum cleaner in the background blowing. And hey, look, bubbles. So, so I got involved a couple of days after the first flight, and first thing I noticed was the interface between the cowling and the fuselage here, where Vans has you have hinges mounted into the cowling as well as into the fuselage, and they're joined together via a hinge pin, except for a gap about that much. There's just no hinge material there, and there's no interface there, so it's a leak path. This builder was a little aggressive on the sanding, so he sanded this rear edge a little bit farther back, and he also changed the mounting method to screws. But you'll notice under here, his flange ends here, he put a little doubler here, and then the hinge is down here. But these two gaps, which are here, are located right in front of the fresh air vent. So during climb out, this airplane's just sucking in carbon monoxide out of the engine compartment into the fresh air vent. It's going all everywhere. It's getting really high. So I told them to put some HVAC aluminum tape over the gaps to see what happened. And the seal levels came down to 30 parts per million versus being off scale. Still way too high, right? Still in the toxic kind of, you shouldn't be doing this. So we redid the whole cowling interface. Decided that the hinges and the half flange thing wasn't going to work. So now the cowl is tighter than Dick's Hats Band. We went with an undermounted flange that extends about 1.5 inches under the fiberglass. Did nut plates, lots of number 8 nut plates, with countersunk screws and reduced head Tinnerman washers to seal it all up. It's very tight. And came down about 20 parts per million in cruise. Still too high. So what's going on here? Okay, I've sealed the obvious leaks that were, getting sucked into the air vent. And we verified it with a handheld. So the EFIS, we're like, well, maybe we've got bad data. So we looked at the handheld versus what the EFIS is saying, and they're within 1 part per million. The response rate was a little different, but they were, 20, 21, 20, 20. So it's like, okay, we still have a problem. So then decided to just get under the airplane and look at what was going on. So under the airplane, aft of the cowling exit, where the exhaust is, you see all the oil and dirt and the kind of the rainbow discoloration of exhaust gas staining all the way back to the rudder cove back here. And you'll notice in the rudder cove here, here's the aft bulkhead, here's the skin, the hinge bracket. Up on the hinge bracket, you can actually almost see it still here. There's carbon, there's exhaust gas residue up there, all the way up there, right? So, and it's per plans. There's nothing in the plans to say to seal it up or anything. But there it is. There's a hole. So a little bit of speed tape in there, and the CO's dropped. So down to 11 parts per million in climb, 1 part per million in cruise. There's a couple more holes I wanted to investigate, but I was pretty pleased with that result. So you can see the HVAC tape to seal it up. We pulled that off and then put it in RTV to seal the gaps, and it held. So the CO dropped to the bottom. So what was going on was the way this is set up is there's a leak path. The cabin of your airplanes are at a lower pressure than the free stream. So anything in the boundary layer or the adjacent airstream is going to get sucked in somewhere into the cabin, either via your air vents being turned on or closed through any available low pressure path. This RV-14 is interesting in that it has a single exhaust pipe that is located about an inch off the skin right in the center of the aircraft. And it's a 3-inch, Rick, it's 3-inch, right? I think, or is it 2.5? It's big hole. Yeah, it's a big pipe, right? And you can kind of see where it sticks out down here. If you look from the side of the airplane, it pops out. It's about maybe an inch or less off of the skin, and there's a ramp that all kind of pulls the exhaust straight in, and it hugs the belly all the way back to the tail. This is the EXP 134 version, the 210 version. The 215 version has exhaust pipes on the outside that stick farther down, and it's probably a little different. Anyway, so we figured out the carbon monoxide was coming in the cabin from the tail. Plugged the leaks, problem went away. And that was it.
So does that happen in every RV-14 built that way?
I would be surprised if it wasn't that way, based on the location of that exhaust pipe and the fact it's a standard kit and whatever. The cowling leaks, yeah, that was a deviation he did. He didn't do it right, so whatever. But the carbon monoxide is going to be present in the exhaust stream. Nothing we can do about it. Now, how it gets into the cabin, you can do something about it.
So just to be clear, when we were looking at the very end of the airplane, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so you sealed it up. That's to keep air from coming in and being sucked into the cabin, because the cabin is usually lower pressure.
Right.
I know you said it. I just want to make sure I got that. So even though it was, could have come out the end of the tail and gone everywhere else, because of the pressure, it's still being sucked into the cabin.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, the air is coming in through all the various holes and orifices and wherever, because it's lower pressure than the free stream.
Right.
Deene.
They probably thought about this. Is there any way we can generalize kind of what to do? Like,
I can guess, but you already got there.
Yeah. So generally, seal up leaks that are along the skin. Look for leaks. Look for leaks in strange places. I didn't. Initially I didn't think to look here. I'm like, it's out. It's the ass end of the airplane. Who's going to look there, right? But until you start looking at it and go, wait, why is there exhaust residue up on that hinge? That hinge is, it's 4 or 5 inches higher than the bottom of the airplane. So it's just getting pulled in around that whole rudder cove area. I looked at another friend of ours, RV-A, and it shows similar evidence. He doesn't have a CO detector.
that line is what I was.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he doesn't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
A little confused because like the RV-6, 7, I think 8 as well, the rear bulkhead behind the cabin is kind of deformed, which allows the air coming into your cabin to exit. It seems odd that it's coming in that way.
It comes in that way. That's actually people complain.
Where does it go out? Yeah, where does it go out?
It goes out the flap holes, the control holes in the cabin under the seats. Every gap it can find, it goes in and out. The thing is, the cabin is a kind of a living, breathing vessel. So, but it's at a lower pressure. So it's breathing, and if it wasn't breathing, and if it wasn't a lower pressure, you wouldn't have any air coming in your vents. If the aircraft was pressurized the same equivalent pressure as the free stream, you'd open a vent and nothing would happen. So by virtue of that lower pressure opening the vent, you get blown out of your seat because it's lower pressure. Not a vacuum per se, but it's, a few tenths of a PSI lower.
But it's enough to bring air even from the back of it. Anyway.
It's enough to bring it in. And it's not, the interesting thing is you didn't smell it. You really didn't smell it. Now I know some guys that have smoke systems are complaining about, I'm getting smoke coming in my cabin. I don't know where it's coming from. I'll bet you it's coming through probably that rudder cove area. And all the RVs kind of have that similar structure. I think the 7 is a continuous flange that they hydroform versus the 14 where they kind of half hydroform and half cut the laser cut or machine cut
So do you think
flanges.
the box deck would change any of that?
Yes.
How they come out?
Yes. I think the fact that most of our 6s and 7s have downturn, or this pipe is pointing way down into the stream, along with that coal shovel shape on the cowling, is putting that exhaust far enough down and far enough back that it doesn't re-entrain into the slipstream. Herman, I'm sorry, I stepped right over you.
No. I was going to say, back to the first one of the pictures you showed, back to the failing exhaust components.
I don't know how to get there.
Yeah, anyway, that's still going to be the main issue for someone who's been flying an airplane that's been working just fine. All the airplanes I've owned, almost every one of them has had some kind of exhaust failure. Mm-hmm. Either bolts coming loose and the exhaust set dropping down, right. Cracks. You can inspect it, and really within a few hours later, you can have an exhaust leak.
Yep.
And the other problem with exhaust leaks is they can cause fires very quickly. Mm-hmm. Because you've got 1,400 degree exhaust gas coming out somewhere, and it can catch something on fire, it can catch the cabin on fire. Besides just giving you carbon monoxide.
Yeah, you can burn an airplane real quick.
So, but it's something to really keep an eye on when you inspect things.
When I do inspections, I actually look at the inside of the cowl, the nose bowl, when I pull it off to see, do I have any scorch marks going on along that? And this airplane actually had a couple of hot spots. There's also a hot spot on the motor mount, right where the exhaust ball joint comes together, and then there's 2 plates, and there are 3 AN bolts with springs to hold the tension on it, to hold the 2 halves together. That one fitting was cocked a little bit, so it couldn't provide enough tension on the ball joint to suck it in, and it was actually blowing exhaust gas on the motor mount. Well, it's only a matter of time before the motor mount begins to become compromised because of that. So it's.
And a lot of those exhaust components are real close to the cowling. A friend of mine in Kingsland had one 7, and he only flew from Kingsland to Atlanta, which was less than 20 miles. And it almost caught the cowling on fire. I mean, it burned exhaust wires, it damaged the motor mount. Yep. It bubbled the paint on the cowling.
Right.
Just because the exhaust is so close to the cowling. That all exhaust gas coming out there, it can cause a lot of problems. So if you're flying and you smell exhaust,
yes.
And I had a pitch one time in an aerobatic contest, I took off and I got a whiff of exhaust when I took off. I climbed up and was hoping, to fly aerobatics. This was down in Texas. As soon as they cleared me into the aerobatic box, I went to full power on the engine, and the engine it was vapor locking. It wouldn't hardly develop any power at all. Spiraled down and landed. Some of the bolts that came loose on the exhaust stack, and it dropped down a little bit, and that exhaust gas was heating up the carburetor.
Yeah.
The suppression carburetor so much that the engine wouldn't run, and that was within about 5 minutes.
I was going to say, we've also seen issues, we're getting a little bit off topic, we've also seen issues where those exhaust headers, the gas inside of there is 1,500 degrees. They are cherry red. They are emitting all kinds of infrared energy. And if you've got a fuel line running anywhere near that fuel is being impinged by that same 1,500 degree Fahrenheit. So you're going to get vapor locks, you're going to get all kinds of things if you don't rupture it and get a fire out of it. So it's real important to put the shielding in place, inspect the shielding, make sure things are not touching, rubbing near the hot exhaust.
I have a CO story.
You do?
No kidding.
There's more. You have a story.
I do. I put a eighth air detector in my RV12 because I was having pretty serious carbon monoxide. And it had to do with exactly the same thing he described, with the way I mounted the cowl. It allowed leakage coming out of the engine compartment right directly into my air vents. Okay, so I closed them up and got thinking about it, and I bought this air, put it in there, and sure enough, even after I sealed all that up, I was still getting, I'd call it single digits, but it was still some. But the good news is, after I chased and looked, I couldn't find what it could be. But as it turned out, the little Aether box failed. So my panel shows 0 all the time. Problem solved.
And the next step?
The first step is ignoring you have a problem.
Dick, is that the only story that you have to tell that doesn't involve losing your engine? What a view, I think.
Yeah. I'm on my second. Of the instruments you had up there, the ones that are hardwired in, can they have to go into EVIS, or can you wire just to the panel light? Are they optional techniques?
I believe the CO Guardian will drive an exterior light. The Aether unit is power, ground, and a discrete output that swings between 0 and 5 volts. So maybe it'll drive an LED. I'm kind of not sure. But I'm almost positive the Guardian, and the Guardian's got a built-in big red light and a squealer in it. So when it goes off, it wakes you up. And it's got a serial output stream into the EFIS, so it can record levels.
Curious what Dan said about the exhaust issue. Sucking it back in.
No comment from Vans, partially because I didn't approach him about it. I did post these findings on Vans Air Force and got a couple of, yeah, me too, oh, good idea, blah, blah, blah. But I haven't talked to Vans. Probably not going to talk to Vans. Just, they got other stuff on their minds. They're a little busy, yeah. But, and again, it's not just Vans, right? This is, I think, any aircraft with the right set of circumstances is going to suck it in. From real bad deals with, the exhaust rupturing to more subtle things like this.
RTV on the tail.
Yeah, but use the right kind of RTV. Neutral cure, not GE silicone 1, because that's acetic acid cure. That's not really good on airframe structures. Or ProSeal if you want to play with ProSeal.
You got a problem opening the outside air vents, will help as opposed to hurt?
Maybe. Maybe not. I mean, in this case, it wasn't helping, right? He opened the air vents and it got worse because the entrainment was happening right to the air vent. So, and again, carbon monoxide, one of those things. If you had an oxygen system, you'd be better served sucking on bottled O2 than continuing the flight with cabin air.
New light speed double do carbon monoxide detection too.
Cool. I missed that one.
Yeah, so if you don't want to do the box card or
your headset has the neat.
Good excuse to like, hey, I'm buying units.
I gotta drop another $1,000 on the airplane. Yeah, Rob.
Honey, I love you. I'm buying you headset.
Fingertip pulse oximeters they tell you your oxygen is low. Will your oxygen drop low then in that oximeter if you have carbon monoxide?
I've kind of often wondered that because of how they work. I don't think that pulse oxes, the visual light type, will actually determine whether you've got too much oxygen saturation or too much carbon monoxide, just because of the hemoglobin being bound up and the refraction of light through your skin. It could be not very useful, but I haven't verified that. Because I'm not going to go suck down a bunch of carbon monoxide to prove it. Why don't you know this?
Hey, just one more comment. Having on the number as you have certified, particularly older airplanes, I didn't really ever appreciate this. And when the comments were made, I just want to reemphasize because a common reaction is I don't spend the money to fix it, or the EMP's so busy, or I may not look at it. I mean, you guys should comment better than me, but this is serious business, and it was totally oblivious to you.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've owned a bunch of airplanes and didn't fly with any carbon monoxide detectors for almost 30 years. And I had no idea what I was exposing myself to. And I've been lucky.
Right, explains a lot.
Yeah.
And one other thing, even though carbon monoxide is odorless, if you do have an exhaust leak, I mean, like the first pictures you showed where you really have exhaust, you're normally going to get some kind of a whiff of those.
Yeah.
So when you get those whiffs,
pay attention to those strange smells because you shouldn't.
If you've got some certified old airplanes that have really good heat system, you got big cans, you got multiple slit things, right? And there's a lot of opportunities for some things.
Especially if you're flying a twin with a Janitrol heater in the nose that's just blowing poison into your cabin.
Right. It's pretty well fixable. I mean, you guys face this. You get this often, by the way.
We see cracked exhaust all the time. There's a crazy vibration going on in the engine compartment. I mean, we pressure test every single exhaust that comes through every time. It's part of our every time.
So, actually, I had a question for you. When you guys do your pressure test, do you do something similar? You put compressed air on the exhaust pipe and then
we have a specific vacuum cleaner that we use.
Perfectly calibrated vacuum cleaner.
Perfectly calibrated and everything with all the different kinds of sizes on the end. And we go around and we'll have it blowing for a good 10 minutes. And we got two guys walking around the cowling with soapy water and bottles and whatnot.
Right.
We found some pretty crazy stuff that we thought, wow, we wouldn't have caught that, or that could have that.
Yeah.
And there's also the times whenever an airplane comes taxiing in, and you're like, man, that doesn't sound right. It's got a quarter-size hole in the exhaust stack, and you're like, oh, that's why that sounds funny.
Do you think this problem could happen even in an open airplane, like a biplane?
Yeah. Just by virtue of the gas being present and air coming into the slipstream and spilling, tripping up, circulating, probably less likely because there's a lot of it's a hurricane in a bottle kind of thing. But enough of the gas in the right place, unless you're putting the air directly in your face. But where's that air coming from? Up front.
It's just having a monitor.
Just put a monitor in. They're relatively cheap. Like I said, they're less than $1,000. So why not?
Two questions. You said it was poisonous. My understanding is it's not poisonous. It replaces, doesn't allow oxygen to get there. So carbon monoxide is not poisonous.
Well, that's sort of, you're parsing terms, right? So is arsenic poisonous? No, it's a metal. But when the right levels and concentration in your body and bloodstream, it behaves like a poison. Now, what is a poison to you? It's something that's incompatible with your life systems, right? It's incompatible with the way your lungs and red blood cells and tissues are set up to function. So yeah, it's not a poison like your weed killer, but you could argue weed killer is not a poison either. Well, yeah.
But the other thing is the solution to pollution is dilution, and that's one of the things that's an engineering term that civil engineers use all the time because it's parts per million.
Right.
So the key is that one of the things that you need to breathe clean, fresh air in there, so that the carbon monoxide is not a problem.
So as an example, the normal occurrence of carbon monoxide in the atmosphere is 1 part per billion. So it's 1 part per million, right, is 1,000 times more concentrated. So when you go to 30 parts per million, you can kind of see where you're going. But you're right. Get rid of the carbon monoxide, reduce it to levels where it's not toxic or causes problems for your life systems in your body.
But you still have this ventilation problem. I mean, you pressure what makes you get ventilated.
Yeah.
Or your wife get ventilated. I'm not sorry, it doesn't sound. You get ventilation.
Right. Plug the leaks, get as much fresh air as you can, suck on an oxygen bottle. That's another thing too, just kind of as an aside. You all have flown at night, right? You ever flown at night on oxygen and seen the difference? It's pretty amazing. Like your visual acuity, your mental processes, you're much, much better. I think Dick and I have traded stories about flying at night and descending into this layer of haze. Suck on the oxygen, the layer of haze goes away because your body's now got more oxygen in it. It's that pressure thing, like I mentioned about, make the oxygen getting into your body, gets into your body a lot easier at sea level pressures or at higher concentrations. So, that's all I have. Thank you all.